Hi everybody, it's Tom Woods. I'm here with Professor Jeff Herbener of Grove City College, and I want to do a video on the subject of deflation, which is a topic I've covered here and there in one portion or another of my talks on YouTube, but it's not very convenient to say to people, all right, well, I'm going to answer you. Go to 33 minutes and 12 seconds of this video and I really get you. So instead, I got Professor Herbener here to do some of the heavy lifting for us. So let's talk about deflation. And I mean, of course, the word can have more than one meaning, but by and large, when people say we got to avoid deflation, they're not, especially in this day and age, they're not really talking about the money supply shrinking, because that pretty much doesn't happen in modern systems. They just mean prices falling.
Right.
Now, most of the time, or I don't know, is it true most of the time that economists will say that if prices are falling because more goods are being produced, and so therefore things exist in greater abundance, that puts downward pressure on prices, that's okay? Is it true that most of them would say that's okay?
Probably oppressed. I'm not sure they think this through very carefully. But you're quite right to point this out. Actually, historically, the economists began to be worried about deflation in prices only in the early 20th century, when the panic started to get worse. We had the panic of 1907 being a prime example of this, where they started to associate falling prices with depressions. But they had almost forgotten the experience of the late 19th century when we had, economic progress driving increased supply of goods and so on, driving prices down, which is perfectly benign and wonderful for the economy.
But we hear today that if prices fall, there are all kinds of terrible consequences that follow. And one line of argument is that, and I almost can't believe this is seriously put forth, but it's that people will indefinitely postpone their purchases because they see prices are getting lower, so they conclude, well, prices will be still lower tomorrow, so I won't be a sucker and buy today. And then nobody buys anything, everybody gets thrown out of work because nobody's buying anything, and then we all die.
Yeah.
Now, are people proposing that this is a serious scenario?
Well, it's a typical kind of thing. Economists suffer from this sort of presumption, right? They have models and they create these utopia situations, so to speak, in models, and this is definitely one of them. Yeah. Because in their real life, as real human beings, and they're out buying things, they know full well that they're going to buy that computer this year when the price is higher than it will be next year, and they're just going to go in and buy it.
Yeah.
They're going to buy the cup of coffee. They're not going to wait for the sale sign Friday when the cup of coffee is going to be cheaper or whatever.
Yeah, right.
So
exactly.
You
want your coffee
silly.
now.
It's silly.
I'm not going to have coffee because 10 days from now I can get another cup for 5 cents less.
Right.
Who acts this way?
Yeah, no one acts this way.
And then of course it's quite possible that you could conclude in some markets that prices have fallen to a point where they're unlikely to continue to fall, so I better buy now. There are all kinds of things that could be driving you to buy now. One of them being the fact that you'd like to have the item now rather than in the indefinite future.
Absolutely. We have to consume.
Yeah. Right.
So we have to.
And one way or another. Yeah. So, all right. So now we don't want to caricature people. So, I mean, is there another maybe more compelling argument about why it would be bad for all prices to fall? When it seems superficially the average person would think falling prices is good. But we're led to think, well, no, that's only superficial. If prices fall, then this hurts everybody. How? What are they saying?
Right. Yeah, the sophisticated version is that prices of consumer goods and output fall more in proportion to prices of inputs and cost of production, and so profits are squeezed on business in deflationary scenarios. But again, this doesn't seem to be correct theoretically that this would be the case. I mean, if you just think about an entrepreneur and you're selling something and suddenly the demand for your product goes down, well, this defunds you, and so now you have less revenue. And so when you go to buy your factors of production, the prices you pay have to be proportionately lower. Now, of course, it may be the case that people just don't like your good anymore,
right.
in which case you go out of business.
But that's what happens on the market anytime.
This is just normal, right?
Yeah, right.
And if it's widespread, if this is just a widespread deflation put in motion by other causes, then prices for inputs can also fall. Workers' real wages will still be the same, maybe even rising. But prices of capital goods and other inputs will be falling.
And so the price spread between what you're paying for your inputs and what you're receiving in sales revenues for your outputs is retained. And that's what matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. But then maybe people don't think there's any necessity to invest in those conditions because all I have to do is sit on my money and it picks up value.
Well, but if they sit on their money, they lose out on the rate of return from investment, which still is maintained again because the profitability of production is maintained.
Okay, now people may say, all right, it's fun for you guys to talk theory, but in reality, we all know that empirically deflation has been bad for economies. But has it?
No. Again, we have these two different scenarios, right, where deflation in prices comes about through extra productivity, capital accumulation, and greater productivity and technological innovation, greater production. And then we have these scenarios of booms and busts where we get a collapse of the wild monetary inflation in the boom, collapsing back and banks failing and so on and so forth. We get a correlation between the deflation and the depression, but it isn't cause and effect.
Right.
It's just a correlation.
Well, and also there's that great, very interesting article from the early 2000s, the Atkinson and Kehoe American Economic Review article, and they looked at something like 17 countries over a century, and excluding the Great Depression, they looked and found that in like 21 of 29 episodes there was a depression with no deflation, and then 40-something out of 40-something other episodes there was depression with no deflation. And so it turns out that there is a greater correlation of inflation with depression.
That's correct.
So can you believe it took until then for people to just bother checking?
That's right.
So in other words,
Why don't we look? And find
right,
out?
exactly. We're all petrified of this.
That's right.
And they didn't even bother to look.
Yeah. It is like a phobia almost among
it is
economists.
a phobia. Yeah, if only I could pronounce Mark Thornton's word.
That's right. He coined the word
about the fear of deflation.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that we've overlooked here about why we're supposed to be concerned about prices falling? I mean, Joe Salerno has a theory that the reason that there's all this concern about deflation is that the sort of people who tend to benefit during inflation tend to lose out during deflation, and these tend to be the fat cats and the people who are highly leveraged.
Right.
And people, there's this myth that, well, the poor benefit during times of inflation, and they get hurt during. That's not true.
No, it's ridiculous.
Right.
It's exactly. If you just think about it in your own personal life, you see it's exactly the opposite.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And if you're hugely leveraged and then this would actually not be good for you. It would be hard for you to continue this sort of reckless spending.
Yeah, that is one other issue though. Is this question of let's say you just have normal debts. And then can they be repaid, right? Doesn't the real burden of the expenditure you have to make to repay them in deflation larger? Wouldn't this, if we had deflation, wouldn't this then suppress this activity?
Right.
But I think again the answer to this is simply at least in a market economy, is simply a choice of monetary regimes. You could hypothetically have a monetary regime where you had so much price deflation that this became a problem, then people would simply switch to a different monetary regime. They'd switch, for example, from gold, where you might have more price deflation over time, to silver, where you had less. And this, again, would not be a problem for the market economy overall, because there, the money, what you choose as money, is also selected by people. It isn't sort of foisted on us, and we have to use this as money, regardless of the fact that it's deflating out of sight and we can't pay our debts back.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, but still, any type of deflation, for any type of episode of deflation, isn't this going to harm people who are debtors? Now, the funny thing is, it seems like you can't satisfy the critics, because on the one hand they'll say, under your regime, people wind up in too much debt.
Yeah.
But then this regime would discourage people from getting into debt, and then they're unhappy about that.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, though, with deflation, so prices would be falling, but and your nominal wages could fall, even if your real wages rise. Your nominal wages, but that debt that you have to repay is in nominal dollars, and it's harder for you to repay it. So what do you say about, look, the average person with his little debt that he has now finds it more and more difficult to service that debt under your ideal monetary regime, which would happen under any hard money. So what do you say about that?
Yeah, again, I think the answer is that people, just like in periods of very rapid inflation, people will adapt to, in their contracts that they make for lending and borrowing, to mild deflation. And so in a regime like this, we would have very low interest rates. And once again, if we had a certain scenario where the interest rates were insufficient to compensate people for this fall in prices and in the increase in the purchasing power of the money, then they would simply switch monies and use something that didn't deflate so rapidly. By the way, this has not historically been the case, right? Even under the gold standard eras, the deflation was very mild. We'd get 1 or 2% price deflation per year.
And we had some of the most robust decades of growth
Absolutely.
in all of
Absolutely.
U.S. history, all of world history during these times. So, who are you going to believe? These critics or your own eyes, basically?
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks for talking to us about deflation. This is Jeff Herbener. He teaches Austrian economics over at libertyclassroom.com, so check that out because that's where all the cool people are learning their economics. And I've got a special page up, libertyclassroom.com/prices, where you can learn more about what we're talking about, deflation, and why you shouldn't be worried about it. I want you to go to sleep tonight. Your insomnia is over. We've cured it for you. And then, of course, learn Austrian economics at learnaustrianeconomics.com. We'll see you around.